Sir, step back. Keep your hands where I can see them.
I'm not resisting. I just need to see my wife. She's in there.
Then let us do our job, all right? Hands up, stay calm.
I haven't done
Nobody's
anything.
saying you have, but you moved past the court and after we told you not to.
Maybe we can talk inside.
At Shasa Patruzet Shishapta. M. The automatic doors of Grady Memorial Hospital slid open for the last time that night. Adrian Hayes was walking toward freedom. 12 hours in the emergency department were finally over. 3 trauma activations. A pediatric cardiac arrest. 47 minutes of chest compressions on a 4-year-old boy pulled from the water. He lived. Adrian hadn't stopped shaking since. Her scrubs still smelled faintly of antiseptic and sweat. Her hands sore from the weight of lives that had refused to let go. She thought about her twin daughters Zoe and Zara, still asleep at her mother's house. Pancakes. Cartoons. School buses. Normal life. Waiting just beyond the parking garage. She was 10 feet from the exit. 10 feet from her car. 10 feet from home. That's when the 2 men stepped into her path. Olive tactical vests. Black boots. ICE insignia stitched onto their shoulders. Adrian Hayes, one of them, asked, "Yes. We need you to come with us." The words didn't make sense. They hovered in the air, disconnected from reality. She had just spent the night saving lives in an American hospital. She had been born in Georgia. She had never lived anywhere else. Before she could speak, a voice cut through the corridor. Calm, controlled, unmistakably authoritative. "Where's your warrant?" The question came from behind her. "Doctor." Michael Sullivan, Chief Medical Officer, former Army trauma surgeon, had stepped between the agents and his nurse. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch them. He simply asked the only question that mattered. "Where's your warrant?" In that moment, a routine shift change became a constitutional crisis. And that single question would cost the federal government $11.9 million. Adrian Hayes was not a stranger to pressure. For 8 years, she had worked the overnight shift in one of the busiest emergency departments in the Southeast. Grady Memorial Hospital didn't sleep. Gunshot wounds. Car wrecks. Overdoses. Strokes. Atlanta's worst nights always ended here. And Adrian was always there. Born in Monroe, Georgia. She was raised in a family that understood service. Her father sorted mail at the Monroe Post Office for 35 years. Her mother taught elementary school for 3 decades. Showing up wasn't optional in the Hayes household, it was who you were. Adrian carried that ethic into medicine. She earned her nursing degree from Emory University, completed advanced training at Georgia State, and passed every background check the hospital required without issue. Her credentials weren't just valid, they were exemplary. In 2022, she was named Georgia Nurse of the Year. Inside the emergency department, her colleagues had another name for her. They called her the heart of the ER. Not because she was gentle, emergency nurses couldn't afford that, but because she stayed calm when everyone else panicked. Because when cases got complicated, when patients became combative, when families broke down in the hallway, Adrian was the one people called. Just hours earlier, she had led the team that saved a 4-year-old drowning victim. 47 minutes of relentless effort. No shortcuts. No quitting. Now, after 12 hours of crisis medicine, she stood in hospital scrubs, being told she didn't belong in the country she was born in. No warning, no explanation, just an accusation. And standing in front of her were federal agents who believed a single anonymous tip mattered more than 8 years of service. Verified credentials, and a lifetime lived openly as an American. Adrian Hayes had spent her career protecting strangers. She never imagined she would need protection herself. "We have information that you're in this country illegally." The words landed with the cold certainty of authority, spoken as if they were already proven. Adrian stared at the agent in front of her, waiting for the sentence to correct itself. It didn't. "I was born in Georgia," she said. Her voice was steady, but the exhaustion from the night clung to every word. "Monroe, Georgia. We need to verify that." The agent replied, "Verify." The word didn't fit the situation. Verification was what hospitals did before hiring staff, what licensing boards did before issuing credentials, what background checks did before granting access to controlled substances and patient records. "I'm a registered nurse," Adrian said. "I work here. I've worked here for 8 years. Employment doesn't prove citizenship. My nursing license does. My hospital background check does. My birth certificate does." The agent's expression didn't change. "We have information." He repeated, "You need to come with us." "Information from who?" Adrian asked. "That's confidential." The hospital security camera above the emergency entrance captured the moment her confusion hardened into something else: clarity. "So someone called you," she said slowly. "Someone said I'm illegal, and you came here without checking anything first." "We're checking now." "No," Adrian replied. "You're not checking. You're detaining me. Those aren't the same thing." The automatic doors slid open behind the agent, and a security guard stepped out, drawn by the rising tension. "Miss Hayes," he said, recognizing her immediately. "Everything okay?" "These agents say I'm here illegally," Adrian answered. The guard's face changed. He knew her. Everyone did. She had worked his mother's case years earlier, chest pain that turned into a heart attack. Adrian had caught it in time. "That's not possible," he said. "She's been here for years. This is a federal matter." The agent snapped. "Step aside." "I'm not stepping aside," the guard replied, reaching for his radio. "I'm documenting this." That was the moment the situation shifted, because what had started as a quiet accusation at the end of a long shift was no longer invisible. And somewhere upstairs in the hospital, an urgent message was already moving toward the one person who would refuse to let this go any further. The security guard's radio crackled to life. "Security to the emergency entrance. We have ICE agents attempting to detain hospital staff." The words carried weight. At Grady Memorial, that kind of call was never made lightly. More guards began moving toward the entrance, their footsteps echoing through the corridor. Nurses passing by slowed, sensing that something was wrong. This wasn't the usual chaos of the emergency department. This was different. Agent Derek Morrison shifted his stance, positioning himself directly between Adrian Hayes and the exit doors. "Ma'am," he said, his tone hardening, "we have information you're here illegally. You need to come with us for processing." Adrian looked at him, disbelief giving way to anger. "I was born in this state," she said. "I've never lived anywhere else. That's what we need to verify. By taking me away from my workplace, without a warrant," Morrison ignored the question. "Sir," one of the security guards said, stepping closer, "this is a healthcare facility. You can't conduct enforcement actions here without proper legal authority. This is federal business." Morrison snapped. "Interfering with federal officers is a crime." The guard didn't back up. "I'm not interfering. I'm documenting, and I'm calling for supervision." He raised the radio again. "Security supervisors to emergency entrance. Now." Morrison's jaw tightened. His partner shifted uneasily, glancing at the growing number of witnesses. Phones were starting to come out. People were watching. "This doesn't need to get complicated," Morrison said, lowering his voice. Just cooperate and this goes easier. Adrian felt the familiar pressure she'd seen so many times with frightened patients, the attempt to make resistance feel dangerous. She didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere without a lawyer," she said, "or a warrant." Behind her, a nurse she'd worked beside for years stepped closer. Then another. Not blocking. Not shouting, just present. At that moment, 4 floors above, Dr. Michael Sullivan's phone vibrated with a single line that cut through everything else. CMO, to emergency entrance immediately. ICE attempting to detain Adrian Hayes. Sullivan didn't ask questions. He left his office and headed for the stairs. Dr. Michael Sullivan didn't wait for the elevator. He took the stairs 4 flights down, moving with the urgency of someone who had spent decades knowing what seconds meant. In his years as an Army trauma surgeon, hesitation had cost lives. He hadn't survived Desert Storm by moving slowly. He pushed through the stairwell door onto the ground floor and saw the situation immediately. 2 ICE agents, Adrian Hayes in scrubs. Security forming a loose perimeter. Staff watching from the edges of the corridor. He recognized the look on Adrian's face. He'd seen it on young medics under fire, focused, controlled, and hiding fear behind discipline. "What exactly is happening here?" Sullivan asked. His voice cut cleanly through the noise. Agent Derek Morrison turned, taking in the white coat, the chief medical officer badge, the presence that came with someone who had spent a lifetime giving orders in places where they mattered. "Sir, this is a federal matter," Morrison said. "We're here for her. We have information she's in the country illegally." Sullivan stepped forward without hesitation and deliberately placed himself between the agents and his nurse. "Information from whom?" he asked. "That's confidential. You're attempting to detain one of my staff members based on confidential information," Sullivan said evenly. "What's your legal authority?" "We enforce immigration law." "Do you have a warrant?" The question wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The corridor went quiet. Morrison hesitated, just long enough. "We don't need a warrant for immigration enforcement." Sullivan didn't move. "This is Grady Memorial Hospital," he said. "A healthcare facility, under federal regulations and state law. You do not conduct enforcement operations here without a judicial warrant." He looked directly at Morrison. "Do you have one?" Silence. Sullivan nodded once. "I didn't think so." He turned his head slightly, never breaking his position. "Adrian," he said calmly, "you are not required to go anywhere with these men." Morrison's face tightened. "Sir, you're interfering with federal officers." "No," Sullivan replied. "I'm doing my job. I'm protecting my staff from unlawful detention." Behind him, more doctors and nurses had stopped. They weren't yelling. They weren't recording yet. They were watching. And for the first time that morning, federal authority had met someone who wasn't afraid of it. Morrison exhaled sharply, the confidence he had arrived with beginning to fray. "Sir, ICE has authority to detain individuals suspected of immigration violations," he said. "We can do that on the street, at workplaces, wherever necessary. This is not a street." "Doctor," Sullivan replied, "this is my hospital." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You are standing inside a protected healthcare facility." Sullivan continued, "We have patients behind those doors whose lives depend on the people you're trying to remove. You will not conduct an enforcement action here without a warrant signed by a federal judge." Morrison glanced at his partner, then back at Sullivan. "We have information," he said again, the phrase losing its force with each repetition. "You have an anonymous tip." Sullivan corrected him. And you're treating it as proof. He gestured slightly toward Adrian. She was born in Georgia. She has been licensed, vetted, and employed here for 8 years. She was just named Georgia Nurse of the Year. And you walked in here at 6:47 inches the morning to take her away like a criminal. That's not your call. Morrison snapped. It absolutely is. Sullivan replied, because she is my staff. And this is my facility. Behind Sullivan, the hallway was no longer empty. Nurses emerged from the emergency department, still in scrubs. A physician paused mid-stride, then stayed. A respiratory therapist leaned against the wall, watching intently. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Their presence alone changed the equation. Morrison shifted his weight, suddenly aware that this wasn't a quiet hallway anymore. This was a room full of witnesses. You need to step aside, he warned. Last chance. Sullivan didn't move an inch. I spent 23 years as a trauma surgeon, he said calmly. I treated soldiers under fire. I have faced threats that would keep you awake at night. He looked Morrison directly in the eyes. You don't intimidate me. The silence that followed was heavy, because the line had been drawn, and everyone in that corridor understood that whatever happened next would define far more than just one morning at Grady Memorial Hospital. The silence didn't last. A voice came from behind Dr. Speniot. Sullivan quiet. Steady. Unmistakable. Where's your warrant? It was Dr. James Chun, an emergency physician who had worked beside Adrian only hours earlier during the pediatric code. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't stepped forward. He simply asked the same question. Another voice followed. Where's your warrant, Nurse Kesha Williams? Then another. Where's your warrant? The words began to ripple through the corridor. Not as a chant, but as a demand. A question that refused to go away. Phones came out. Not dramatically. Not for attention. For documentation. For accountability. Morrison's partner took a step back, scanning the faces now surrounding them. Doctors. Nurses. Technicians. People who had spent their careers protecting others and recognized injustice the moment they saw it. You're interfering with a federal operation, Morrison said. His voice louder now. Sharper. Sullivan didn't turn around. Then arrest all of us, he said, because no one here is stepping aside. The hallway filled. 15 people became 20. Then more. They didn't touch the agents. They didn't block them physically. They stood. That was enough. For the first time, Morrison hesitated openly. He wasn't facing a single administrator anymore. He was facing a hospital, an institution with cameras, witnesses, and credibility. His partner leaned in, voice low and urgent. Derek, this is getting out of control. There are too many people recording. Morrison snapped back without turning. Shut up. But the damage was already done. Because when authority is forced to raise its voice, it has already begun to lose. And in that corridor at Grady Memorial, the balance of power was shifting slowly, visibly, and in front of everyone. Agent Morrison's patience snapped. The corridor was no longer quiet. Too many eyes, too many phones, too many people who knew exactly what was happening and were refusing to look away. This ends now, Morrison said. He stepped forward, not toward Dr. Sullivan, toward Adrian. Before anyone could react, his hand shot out and clamped around her arm. The grip was hard, possessive, final. You're coming with me, he said. Adrian gasped, not from pain, but from shock. 8 years in emergency medicine had prepared her for blood. Screams, and death. It had not prepared her for being seized at work by a federal agent without a warrant. Everything happened at once. Dr. Sullivan moved instantly. Decades of surgical precision translated into a different kind of response. His hand locked around Morrison's wrist. Firm and controlled. "Let go of her," Sullivan said. Morrison pulled harder. "She's being detained." "No," Sullivan replied, his voice dropping to a calm that carried real danger. "You are assaulting a healthcare worker in a hospital. Without a warrant. Let her go." Behind them, the staff surged forward, not to attack, not to interfere, but to witness. Phones captured every angle. The security camera above the emergency entrance recorded the moment federal enforcement crossed into criminal behavior. Morrison's partner froze. "Derek," he said, panic creeping into his voice. "Stop. This isn't worth it." "Shut up," Morrison snapped. But he was no longer in control. Security radios crackled. "Atlanta PD en route. Repeat, Atlanta PD en route." Sullivan tightened his grip just enough to make his point. "You have 5 seconds," he said quietly. "Release her, or this becomes the end of your career." Morrison looked around. 20 cameras, 30 witnesses, an entire hospital watching. And for the first time that morning, the weight of consequences finally broke through the illusion of authority. For a long second, no one moved. Morrison's hand was still locked around Adrian's arm. "Doctor." Sullivan's grip was still firm on Morrison's wrist. The corridor held its breath. "Derek," his partner said again, this time barely above a whisper. "Look around." Morrison did. He saw the phones raised at chest height, recording steadily. He saw nurses who had just come off 12-hour shifts refusing to leave. He saw physicians who had testified in courtrooms before and understood exactly what this footage would mean. He saw Atlanta police officers stepping through the emergency entrance. That was enough. Morrison's fingers loosened. Adrian was released. She stumbled backward, caught immediately by Nurse Williams and Dr. Chun. Someone pulled her behind the line of staff, away from the agents. Hands checked her arm. Voices asked if she was okay. Morrison stood alone in the center of the corridor. No badge. No authority. Just a man surrounded by witnesses. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Doctor." Sullivan didn't raise his voice. "You're right," he said. "It's not." Atlanta PD moved in, separating everyone, asking for names, identifying witnesses. The agents were instructed to remain on site, not as enforcers but as subjects of an investigation. Security footage was secured within minutes. Phones were backed up. Hospital administration was notified. The words "federal agents assaulted staff" moved quickly through legal and political channels. Adrian sat in a nearby office, wrapped in a blanket someone had brought her. Her hands shook around a cup of coffee she couldn't drink. "I was just leaving work," she said quietly. "I was just going home." "Doctor." Sullivan sat across from her, the adrenaline beginning to fade. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "This wasn't about you." Outside that office, the machinery of accountability was already turning. And for Agent Derek Morrison, the moment he had lost control of that hallway would follow him for the rest of his life. The story didn't stay inside Grady Memorial. By 7:30 a.m. News vans lined the street outside the emergency entrance. By 00:00, it was national. A black nurse nearly detained by ICE inside a hospital. No warrant. Cameras rolling. Behind the scenes, investigators moved fast. Security footage was reviewed frame by frame. body camera footage was pulled. Phone recordings from hospital staff filled in every angle Morrison's camera missed. And then came the question that mattered most. Where did the tip come from? Within 72 hours, federal investigators had the answer. The anonymous call traced back to a prepaid phone purchased at a gas station in Buckhead. Cell tower data narrowed the window. Voice analysis confirmed the speaker. His name was Gerald Whitmore, 47 years old, accountant, no criminal record. 3 weeks earlier, Whitmore's wife had been treated in Grady's emergency department for chest pain. The wait time had been 4 hours standard for a Level 1 trauma center on a busy night. The nurse who triaged her was Adrienne Hayes. She had been professional, courteous, by the book. The diagnosis was acid reflux. Uncomfortable, but not life-threatening. Whitmore left angry, and instead of filing a complaint, instead of speaking to hospital administration, he picked up a phone. He told ICE that Adrienne Hayes was an undocumented immigrant using stolen credentials. It was a lie fueled by frustration, entitlement, and a dangerous assumption about who belonged where. What shocked investigators even more was what came next. Agent Derek Morrison hadn't verified the claim. No check with the nursing board. No call to the hospital. No record search that would have confirmed Adrienne's citizenship in minutes. His file revealed a pattern. 14 prior enforcement actions based solely on anonymous tips, all targeting Black or Hispanic professionals. All conducted without warrants. All unfounded. This wasn't a mistake. It was a method. And now, it was documented. The federal courtroom in Atlanta was full. Not just with lawyers and reporters, but with nurses in scrubs, doctors in white coats, and hospital staff who had taken time off to be there. The same people who had stood in that corridor now sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery. The security footage played first. The jury watched Adrienne Hayes walk toward the exit. They watched Agent Morrison block her path. They watched Dr. Michael Sullivan step between them. And they watched Morrison reach past him and grab her arm. There was no narration, no commentary. The footage spoke for itself. Adrienne testified next. She wore the same blue scrubs she wore to work. Her hospital badge clipped to her chest. "I had just finished a 12-hour shift," she said. "We saved a 4-year-old that night. I was thinking about my daughters." Her voice didn't break when she described the accusation. It broke when she described the grab. "I thought if they take me, who's going to tell my kids where their mother went?" Dr. Sullivan followed. He stood straight. White coat pressed. Voice steady. "I asked one question." He told the court. "Where's your warrant?" That question protects every American in this room. Without it, authority becomes fear. The defense tried to frame it as confusion, a misunderstanding, a good faith error. The jury didn't buy it. After 4 hours of deliberation, the verdicts were read. Guilty. On all counts, for unlawful detention, for assault, for deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The room didn't cheer. It didn't need to. Justice doesn't make noise when it finally arrives. The civil settlement came quietly. No press conference. No victory lap. Just a number that spoke for itself. $9 million. The federal government agreed to pay rather than risk a public trial that would expose years of unchecked enforcement practices inside protected spaces like hospitals and schools. Adrienne Hayes didn't celebrate. She returned to work 2 weeks later. Same emergency department. Same overnight shifts. Same patients who needed the nurse her colleagues still called the heart of the ER. But something had changed. A new policy followed the settlement. ICE would now require judicial warrants for any enforcement action inside healthcare facilities nationwide. What had once been discretion was now written law. Backed by precedent, Adrian used part of the settlement to secure her daughter's future. Another portion went to nursing scholarships at Emory and Georgia State, and a permanent fund was created to provide legal protection for healthcare workers targeted by unlawful enforcement actions. Dr. Michael Sullivan received a national award for leadership. When asked what he had done that morning, he shrugged. "I stood where I was supposed to stand." At the ceremony, he looked out at an audience filled with hospital administrators and physicians. "Every one of you has people who trust you to protect them," he said. "That trust matters. If you don't defend it when it's tested, you never really had it." Today, the security camera still watches the emergency entrance at Grady Memorial Hospital. The doors still open at shift change. Nurses still walk out exhausted, thinking about family, about rest, about tomorrow. But there is now a line that cannot be crossed, because one morning, when power overreached, someone asked a simple question, a legal question, a moral question, a human question. Where's your warrant? And because of that question, no one has tried again. No one ever will.